In this episode, we're going to talk about how to avoid reference song interference. So very quickly, what this is a lot of times what people will do is they will use a reference song to identify a perfect fourth, fifth, major sixth, things like that. And this gets in the way of them truly developing a powerful ear, because every time you use a reference song, you have to reference that song and then make a comparison to the interval that you think you hear. So this is a very ineffective way of developing your ear, and I'm going to share with you some strategies for how you can actually avoid this in your own ear training. Welcome to the UreMusic Mentor podcast. I'm Kevin Ure, and I'm here to train your ear. I'm an author of several textbooks on music composition, ear training, and music theory. I've served as a music theory professor and currently run the composer studio over at UreMusic.com. I aim to make music education accessible and provide deeper insights into the nature of music. Please like, subscribe, and find us on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform. Interval training, very simply, is when you go to a piano or you have somebody else go to a piano and you pick out individual intervals and you try and identify them. Now there's many different ways to do interval training. You can pick a particular note on the piano and then try and sing the interval you're focusing on, either above or below that note. So for example, if you wanted to sing a major third, maybe you go to the piano and you play the note bum, and then you try and sing a major third above it. Bum, bum. And then you check yourself on the piano to make sure you got it right. That's one way to do it. Another way is to have somebody play intervals on the piano and ask you to identify them. You can also use apps. My Flawless course takes you through this. There are many different courses and websites out there that can actually teach you interval training. There is no shortage of interval training applications. But interval training is really important for musicians. Even if you've come across somebody who says, you don't need interval training, just listen to scale degrees. You need interval training, because what interval training does is it teaches you the characteristic sounds of individual sounds that make up musical works. And this is really important if you want to be an effective listener and performer, or if you want to be a composer. So the common issue that we're confronting right now is this idea that you use a reference song to listen and identify intervals. So if I sing "Here Comes a Bride," bum, 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 here comes a bride, the first two notes are a perfect fourth. If I then want to sing a perfect fifth above that, I'll have to use another reference song to try and identify a perfect fifth. So this becomes problematic because you can't simply go and sing "Here Comes a Bride" and then your perfect fifth song, then your major sixth song, then your minor sixth song, and then your major second song. You can't do this to sing melodies. It's too much work. It's too complicated. So what you have to do is develop this natural ability to really hear these intervals and these chords as they are. And they change slightly depending on how high or how low they are, or what notes you're actually focusing on. Like a C major triad and a D major triad, they actually sound slightly different. And these are things that I explain in more detail in my Flawless course. But this is just a podcast, not much music involved. We're just going straight into the actual theoretical aspect of these things. So, the importance of interval training. Intervals are essentially a way of measuring the distance between two notes. So if you hear the notes bum, bum, we can actually count chromatically how many notes are between the lowest one, bum, and the top one, bum. And we find there's actually 7 half steps. And so then we can say, that is the distance of a perfect fifth. Or if we have a perfect fourth, there's 5 half steps. Bum, bum. So that is the distance of a perfect fourth. If we want to do a major sixth, bum, bum, that actually has 9 half steps. So we want to try and figure out the number of half steps so that we can identify these intervals a little more precisely and we can work with them. So there are different types of intervals. You can have major, minor, perfect, augmented, and diminished. that's beyond the scope of this course, but essentially most intervals are either going to be major or minor, and major intervals in a lot of ways are very similar to perfect intervals. They both kind of have that stable major quality. The difference between a perfect and a major interval is a major interval gets slightly squished or modified when we take it from nature. The perfect intervals actually still conform to the overtones that we hear in nature. This is a much more complicated discussion that can be saved for a later date. We're not going to get into that now. But there are different labels for intervals. So major, minor, perfect, augmented, diminished. Those are all qualities of intervals that we can use to differentiate between the different types of thirds, or the different types of fourths, or the different types of fifths. So you don't just have a fifth, you have a perfect fifth, or an augmented fifth, or a diminished fifth. You don't just have a third, you have a major third, or a minor third, or a diminished third, or an augmented third. So these are some things that we can get into at a later point. There's also enharmonics. So you can have two notes that are written differently when you write them on staff paper, but they also share different note names, but they sound the same. So an example of an enharmonic would be like C sharp and D flat. C sharp and D flat, when I play it on the piano, they are the same exact pitch, but they're notated differently, and there's lots of reasons for that as well, which again will be saved for another episode. All right, so let's talk about this issue of reference song interference. Let's say I'm really proud of myself. I've learned all my intervals. I know what a perfect fourth is because it's Here Comes a Bride. I know a perfect fifth, it's Star Wars. I know a major sixth, it's My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. I am ready to go. I'm going to pick up a piece of sheet music and I'm going to sing it perfectly. Okay, so I pick up my sheet music and I see a perfect fourth. Ha, easy. That's Here Comes a Bride. So I sing bum bum, here comes, right? Here comes the bride. That's where I got it from. I got it from the reference song of Here Comes the Bride. So I remove the words and I say bum bum. Great. Nailed the first two notes. Now I need to sing My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean because the next interval is a major six. So I sing my perfect fourth first. Here comes, and now I pivot to My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. Here comes my ba. And now I've got the initial melody. Bum, bum, bum. But I'm using these reference songs to identify these intervals. And then I have a major second and a minor second. I'm using jaws. I'm using a whole tone scale. I'm using West Side Story. I'm using all these different songs to sing a simple melody because I never got away from the crutch of using a reference song to identify intervals. And you have to. And there's ways to do it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So some strategies to avoid using reference song interference, because it is interference. When you sing Here Comes a Bride, I mean, I had trouble doing it. I have no trouble singing individual intervals because I know the characteristic sound. But if I now go back, as I previously did just a moment ago, and I sing Here Comes the Bride and then My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, I actually lose my pitch because I don't know how to do it that way anymore. That was something I did long ago to pass those undergraduate exams, and it was just a waste of time, honestly. It didn't help me at all in the end, develop my ear to what it is today. So it's much easier for me to just focus on the quality of intervals, and then I can sing these things much more quickly. So what you want to do to avoid this interference, because it is interference, is you want to use a variety of exercises and tools to avoid your reliance on familiar songs. So in my flawless course, I go over tons of different exercises, and all of them are geared towards opening up your ear so that you can just hear these sounds. Okay, one of the things you want to do is you don't even want to use solfege, because solfege implies tonality. You want to use neutral sounds. So you practice with neutral sounds or tones instead of songs to train your ear. So a perfect fourth is bum bum, bum bum, bum bum, bum bum, bum bum, bum bum, bum, bum. A perfect fifth is bum, 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 bum. And you try it at different intervals, different rhythms, and things like that, so that you're not always singing it the same exact way. And you go through and you practice all your intervals in this way, using neutral sounds. I'm not saying do, fa, or do, so. So we're avoiding using any sort of specific syllables to sing these intervals. You also want to use incremental learning. So you'll gradually increase the complexity of intervals to build the strongest foundation. So what that means is you learn the perfect fourth or the perfect fifth, whatever interval you want to start with. You learn one interval really well to where you can kind of sing it on the piano, and then you start comparing it to another interval that's closely related, like the perfect fourth. Sometimes what I'll do in my Music 101 courses when I was teaching that is I do a perfect fifth and a major third, because that taught them how to hear a major triad. And it was easier to hear a fifth and a major third than it is to hear a perfect fifth and a perfect fourth. So there's different strategies on what intervals you can actually start with. But I do think that starting with the two perfect intervals makes a lot of sense because they're inversions of each other. If you go from C to G, ascending, that's a perfect fifth. If you then go from G to C, that's a perfect fourth. Same notes, but depending on what notes on the bottom, it changes what the interval is. So there's a lot of different strategies, but you want to get away from using any particular single strategy to learn the characteristic sounds of these notes. So you need listening, you need singing, you need audiation, you need hearing these intervals within textures, like larger textures like chords and ensembles. You need a lot of different strategies to really learn these intervals, and it can be a lot of fun because once you develop that skill, it's yours for life. You really don't lose this ability. I don't practice my perfect fifths or perfect fourths anymore. I just know them, and that same goes for the other intervals. You reach a point where your ear is reinforced because you hear music all the time. You hear birds chirping, you hear a treadmill. I remember I was running on a treadmill one day and I heard a major second. I was like, oh, the motor and the belt were going at a major second interval. So there's little things where you just hear these sounds everywhere. So some practical exercises and tools. I mean, really the best thing you can do is there's some interactive tools you can use. You can use musictheory.net. You can use my Flawless course. There's a lot of tools that are available. What you need to do is find the tool or the application that motivates you to keep moving forward. Also, daily practice routines. One of the things that I mandated in all of my college introductory music courses, so first year music theory for music majors and non-majors, if I taught those, I sometimes taught non-major courses. What I would require is for students to sing two exercises. I would have them sing the daily routine, which you can find on my website, and the mirror exercises. So the daily routine, what it would do is it would take them through the fundamentals. We'd sing a warm-up, we'd sing an interval, two intervals usually, we'd sing scales, and we'd sing chords, and we could get through it in a really concise fashion where the entire exercise was completed in less than 10 minutes, 6 minutes once you really mastered the daily routine. And the daily routine would be something that you just do every day as a warm-up to prime your ear and to focus on these critical foundational skills that you need for music. The goal was to be able to sing it, the entire thing through. And when I first started, I actually made students make recordings of themselves singing the daily routine. It ended up not being a great thing. They learned from that, but a lot of them, I could tell they were using earbuds and they were listening to the actual daily routine. So I found ways to actually incorporate it in class so they would actually have to do it. So another exercise I would use is a mirror exercise, and I package the daily routines and mirror exercises together on my website. It's under the Technique Builder workbook if you're interested in that. But when you do these two things together, once you master it, it takes 10 minutes to do this foundational exercise, and then you move on to your ear training. So you need something like that. Create a daily routine for yourself that consists of the areas you're having trouble with. Start with a warm-up, focus on intervals, then work on chords, and then work on scales. Or you can just download the daily routines and mirror exercises, and you can follow along with that. The mirror exercise, what those do is they focus on one interval at a time and get you to sing the interval. So that gets it in your head. It gets you used to the sound of the interval. So you need some practical exercises and tools that you can do daily that don't take you a ton of time. And you can create your own. It's a lot of fun to do that. Or there's probably lots of other people that create similar daily routines and exercises. You just have to find the one that works for you. So there's lots of tips and advice I could give you, but I think if I had to pick my best tip, the thing that is most effective for most people, it's this idea of going to a piano and playing a single pitch and then trying to sing an interval above it, and then confirming that interval by playing it on the piano to make sure you hit the right pitches, and then sing that interval several times. So I go to the piano and I go, bum, and I want to sing a perfect fifth. So I got that note, bum, so I sing it, bum, and then I try and sing a perfect fifth above it, bum. So then I play the G above it on the piano and I check. I count up 7 half steps, bum, and I got it right. So once I've confirmed I got it right, doesn't matter if you got it right or wrong. If you got it wrong, you just fix it, and then you sing it correctly 6 to 10 times in a row. Bum, bum, thoughtfully. Bum, 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 and you just do this 10 times. And then you go up to the next white key on the piano. And then you do this process again. And then the next white key, and you just go ascending up to a comfortably high portion of your range. Don't strain your voice. Once you get to the top of your range, reverse the interval. Bum, 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 and you go down. And you just do this up and down several days, at least a week, until you feel like you've mastered that particular interval. Once you've mastered that interval, start with that one and just go up the white keys and down the white keys for a day or two once you feel like you mastered it. Then add the chromatic notes. So now you're going chromatically up the piano and sing every note in an octave if you can. Once you've done that, you can add other intervals, like maybe the perfect fourth. If you follow the format of my mirror exercises, they start with the perfect fifth, perfect fourth, major third, major sixth, minor sixth. They actually start in the sequence that I recommend you learn intervals in. And there's a reason for that. There's a lot of logic to why I'd start with the perfect fifth, which I'll talk about in future sessions. So another thing you can do, because you need at least 2 exercises, is you can play 3-note chord clusters and make sure that the interval that you're focusing on is inside that chord cluster. So, for example, you can try and hear the interval within the chord. So if I play 3 notes, let's say I have a C going up to an F, that's a perfect fourth, and then an F going up to another C. So it's 3 notes. So I got a perfect fourth in the bottom and a perfect fifth on the top. So now what you do is you play those 2 notes, that entire chord, the 3-note chord, and you try and isolate the interval you're working on. If it's a perfect fifth, listen for the perfect fifth. If you're working on the fourth, listen for the fourth in the bottom. Hear it in context with other notes. And you don't have to worry about if these are chords. Just randomly pick 3 notes, but make sure 2 of the notes form the interval you're focusing on. That can also help open up your ear. My Flawless course does this too. Not to plug that course, but I mean it does. So all this information I'm talking about is actually just kind of included in a very streamlined way in my Flawless course. And just kind of pay attention to any music that uses primarily stepwise motion and the interval you're working on. So that way you can kind of get a sense for what stepwise motion feels like, but also every once in a while you'll have a perfect fifth in there. So it's very hard to find music that just uses stepwise motion in a perfect fifth. So you can create your own, record them, forget about them, and then come back the next day, play the recording and try and dictate them. Or in my Flawless course, I actually take you through a process where dictations focus on one interval at a time in a lot of cases. There's other intervals mixed in as well, but it's closer to the process I'm describing here. where you try and listen to music that only uses stepwise motion and the interval you're working on. You usually have to create those on your own. So my main strategies are going to a piano. If we're going to do a recap here, go to a piano, play a tone. Start with the white tones. Sing the interval you're working on. Sing the bottom note, the top note, check it on the piano. Go up to the next white key. Do it again. Go up to the limit of your range. Then sing them descending. Go down to the lower limit of your range. Then sing them chromatically. Once you've got that, make sure you're listening to these intervals inside of a cluster, so multiple notes at once. Once you've done that and you feel like you've mastered a particular interval, add another one, but only once you've mastered that interval. And I recommend you stay on one interval at least 1 week, and a month would be even better. So in 1 year, you'll have all your intervals, but you'll have them for life if you follow that process. And just practice. You know, the way that you get better is you just find 30 minutes. You carve out 30 minutes in your day and you just practice. Make your daily practice, attach it to an activity. So you wake up, you drink coffee, and you do your interval training. Or you wake up and you do interval training. You take a shower, you do your interval training. You eat lunch, you do an interval training. Before you go to bed, you do interval training. Attach it to an activity, one where you usually have a little bit of flexibility and a little more free time, so that you can do this every single day, and you will see that your ear will improve.